Support for The Common comes from the law firm of Davis Malm, representing HR personnel, businesses, executives, and individuals, gives Davis Malm's employment lawyers a 360-degree view of every workplace situation. Learn more at davismalm.com.
WBUR Podcasts, Boston.
I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and you're listening to The Common. When Jessie Little Doe Baird was growing up on Cape Cod in the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, she didn't have a relationship with her native language, the Wampanoag language. That's because, centuries earlier, an intentional campaign by white settlers succeeded in making it obsolete. The Wampanoag were banned from speaking or writing it, and teachers were discouraged from teaching it. A language that existed for more than 10,000 years before the English arrived became a distant memory. But that changed a couple decades ago when Jessie Baird had a 3-night vision where she describes being visited by her ancestors. It would inspire her to revitalize the Wampanoag language. She then co-founded the Wampanoag Language Reclamation Project to reteach her language to her community and her family. Her daughter May will become the first native speaker of the language. I spoke with Jessie Little Doe Baird about the project earlier this fall on Radio Boston, and we want to share it with you now, right here on The Common. And we'll begin with my question, asking her when the Wampanoag began writing the language.
The language started to be codified with an alphabet in the 1630s. And at the time, most of the push for codification had to do with translating religious documents from English into Wampanoag. My grandparents and their contemporaries of the day, Wampanoag people, quickly realized that the writing codification was a tool that they could employ to maintain tenure on the land and record land transfers and deeds and wills and all sorts of other legal documents. And so people started writing everything down. A lot of people adopted their own spelling systems, which is a challenge, but that's what English speakers did too. There was no such thing as standardized spelling in the 1600s. So at a certain point in time, it became a point of contention, a problem for colonists that had come and stayed. Because if there were no written contract in place, an Englishman, for example, could take a Wampanoag person, for example, to debtor's court and say, Mr. Adequin or Mr. Wampanoag or Miss Wampanoag owes me X money or sold me X piece of property, etc. And if there weren't a written record of the transaction, the Englishman would be believed in court. It was at that time when Wampanoag people said, well, no, there is a document here, there's a record here. That became a problem for colonists. So they started to discourage codification of the language. The first Bibles put to press on this continent were printed in Wampanoag in 1663 on a printing press at Harvard College. But after King Philip's War, those were burned. Most of them were burned.
What was your relationship to the Wampanoag language when you were growing up? What did you hear or learn about it?
Well, I didn't realize that most of the place names that surround us today are surviving in our language, although many of them are sort of a bit bastardized, but that's still Wampanoag we're hearing. Even in the word Massachusetts, the S at the end is English corruption, but
when you say,
Mashpee,
and I would love, real quick, I would just love for you to explain, like, when you say the S at the end of Massachusetts is English corruption.
So Massachusetts, that means the place at the bottom of a large hill. And so it's like the foothills. It means the place of the foothills. And it's the area around the Blue Hills, around Boston. That was the place name. Mm-hmm. There was a tribe there, a Wampanoag tribe there, the Massachusetts tribe, just like I'm from the Mashpee tribe, but I'm Wampanoag.
Yep.
My husband's from the Aquina tribe, but he's Aquina Wampanoag. There was Massachusetts Wampanoag people there. And when they were referred to by the English, they used a place name and put an English plural at the end to refer to the people there. So you have Boston, and people might be called Bostonians. Where the Mashpee tribe, they called us the Mashpees. So even though Mashpee's not English, they just put an S at the end.
Got it. Got it. Thank you for explaining that.
So yeah, so my relationship, it's not a language that was spoken in my coming up. There were words here or there that we said as kids, but I didn't realize that they were Wampanoag words even that were left over. But I didn't have an intimate relationship with my language in my formative years, unfortunately.
Were you ever discouraged from having that connection?
No, by the time I came into the world, our language was so marginalized that it wasn't a point of discussion in the community anymore.
Tell us more about that. How did it get to that point?
Starting as early as the 1600s, it became inconvenient.
Yeah.
And so there was discouragement, people speaking the language at all. So if you happened to work for an Englishman and you were Wampanoag, if you used Wampanoag, you would not be hired, or you couldn't keep your job if you used Wampanoag. And teachers weren't allowed to teach or learn Wampanoag or teach in Wampanoag. In fact, after King Philip's War, it was outlawed, I think, in many domains because the English needed to keep track of folks. And if they couldn't understand what you were saying or writing, they couldn't keep track of you. They just discouraged it and then outlawed it, burned any books that were written in Wampanoag, and by the 1800s, forbade teachers to teach in Wampanoag.
Wow. So how do you even go about resurrecting this language?
So we have a prophecy about language, and we consider language as a community member. And it was prophesied that there was a time when language would leave the people. And it was also prophesied that there would be a time when language would be welcome home if people were ready for it.
And this project started with a dream, am I right?
It started with a 3-night vision, actually, which is a little different than
a vision. Thank you. Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. Most people don't know the difference. It's not your thing. It was a 3-night vision. And I didn't have any education in linguistics. I didn't think a lot about the language, really, maybe hardly ever, where I had this vision, and it picked up where it left off 3 nights in a row. And after that vision, my life changed, my passion changed, my work changed.
What was the vision?
I was in a place where there were houses all along the edge of the water, and the houses were standing, but the water itself, it was a bay, and it was dead. I don't know how to explain it to you, but the water, whatever was in the water was dead. Something had happened, and I found myself alone and calling out, and there was no one. And I saw a yellow house far away in the field, and I was on the back side of the house, and there was a bulkhead, a basement with a bulkhead, and the bulkhead was open, and I saw light coming from the basement, and I went there. And when I started to go down into the basement, it was just a regular average size house, but the basement was like 10 football fields. Once I got inside, the place was immense. And there were circles all around this huge, huge landscape. There were circles of Indian folk, and all of the circles of Indian people made one large circle. And when I got to the bottom step, the circle closest to my right chanted something. And the second time they chanted it, the second circle joined in. And it went this way and kept going this way. And when I got back up near the top sometime later, the last circle of people was a circle of my own people. I recognized them.
Wow.
They had a really large book spread across all of their laps, and the book was curved to shape the circle, the shape of the circle. And I got scared for some reason. I got really scared. So I got really low and tried to sneak behind them. And I thought, okay, it's time to get out of here. One person said in English, "But what does it mean?" And the person next to him said, "Ask Jessie, she knows." And it startled me. And I said, I don't know anything. I don't know what it means. And one of the women said, "Well, we think you do know, and we can't let you leave until you tell us." And I'm like, okay, what was that? And I just didn't know what it was. And after that, I happened to be driving down Route 28 on the Cape, and there was a sign for Sipawissat. I've seen that sign my whole life. And when I saw it, and I said it to myself, a light went on, like the light on a Marblehead. I'm like, oh, wait, I think that language I heard was Wampanoag. And I heard the phrase so many times, I knew that the language I was hearing in that vision was the same language on that sign as Sipawissat. And the very second that my spirit made that connection, it was almost like somebody literally lit a fire inside of my chest. And I felt pulled to the language in a way that I couldn't, it wasn't really a choice. Like I really didn't choose the work. It asked me, it pulled me to it. And that's how I started studying.
Wow.
I had no idea that we had the largest collection of Native written documents on the continent. I had no idea the first Bible was printed in our language. I had no idea about any of it at all. I was a social worker.
Wow. I mean, you seem to have this deep connection with the language. I wonder what does that make you think about the concept of language itself? Because I'm listening to you and it feels like the language was in you. It's a part of you, right? Even though throughout history, settlers tried to do away with it, they really couldn't because it's inside of you.
Yeah, it lives in my genes. It lives in my blood. And I'm still connected to all the places where language lives. So, for example, the word for land is ahki. Ahki means land, just land. And if I say on the land, I would say ahkiat. But if I say my land, I put nut in the front, which is the my part. So it's not just nataki, though. It's natakim. Some nouns take an M when they're possessed, and that M means the thing that I'm expressing that is mine is my body, and I am it. When you say my land, it's natakim. It's my land that is my body, and my body is my land. And we're still in this place where we've been for thousands of years, still with our feet touching our land, and our land not being separate from our bodies. The word for creator is manat, which means the all-encompassing spirit, creator. But when I say my creator, it's namanatum, and it takes an M final. So I am my creator, and my creator is me. We are one with the land, and nothing can come in and separate that relationship. And so we come from the land, and we come from the sea. We're land and sea people. So our creator, our land, our language, and our words, the word for words, are all take M endings.
It's all a part of you.
That's right. It lives in my genes. It lives in my blood.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back.
I'm Meghna Chakrabarty, host of On Point. At a time when the world is more complex than ever, On Point's daily deep dive conversation takes the time to make the world more intelligible. From the state of democracy to how artificial intelligence is transforming the way we live and work to the wonders of the natural world. One topic each day, one rich and nuanced exploration. That's On Point from WBUR. Be sure to follow us right here in your podcast feed.
And we're back with Jessie Little Doe Baird, co-founder and teacher with the Wampanoag Language Reclamation Project. As you're talking about this, and you mentioned, how the language is in your genes and your blood, and you're mentioning this connection from the creator to the earth, your daughter, May, became the first native speaker of the new generation. I mean, talk about working with her, teaching her ancestral language and what it's like to hear her speak it.
Well, I can tell you that we tried to use it as much as possible from the moment she was born. We made sure the first sound that she heard outside the womb was Wampanoag. And my husband and I have really worked hard to make sure she has language every day. And I think she was almost 3. I think maybe she was 3. And we were in the driveway and it was hot. It was hot. It was July. And my husband said, whew, kasabtiao. And kasabtiao means like something is hot, but to the touch, like an item is hot to the touch. And they said, mata, kasatao. And she said, no, it's not a hot thing. It's hot weather. And she corrected my husband's Wampanoag. And we were just really excited that day. And she still studies and she still speaks. And she's funny. She always is like, well, I'm not a good enough speaker. I'm like, May, you're a great speaker. Like, you don't understand. You don't understand. We had no native speakers until you were born. So I enjoy working with her. She's in the 3-and-3 law program now. She's a grown woman. She's at UMass Dartmouth in college. She's 20 years old, but she's still studying language and still using language. And it makes me really happy.
Does she have friends she can speak and practice with?
Yeah, she's got nieces and nephews and siblings. And one of my older daughters, another daughter, actually followed the same path I took and completed a Master's of Science in Linguistics, and is a very good Algonquian linguist as well, and a very good speaker.
You know, you mentioned higher education and the degrees that your daughters have. You have several degrees yourself, including some honorary degrees. In 2010, you got a MacArthur Fellowship. I wonder, do you ever find it strange to be recognized for your work reclaiming the Wampanoag language, knowing the history of America and how, you know, they tried to make your language disappear?
I don't find it strange. Unfortunately, I will say that at one point in time, I worked in the social service field and I worked for my tribe as the receptionist. Mm-hmm. So I would get calls from people asking all sorts of questions about Wampanoag, whatever, in the 80s and early 90s. And never, ever, in any letters we received or phone calls did anybody ask about language. And then never asked any questions about it at all. It wasn't until we reclaimed something that people outside of our community did not have that they were interested in it and that they wanted it. And I find that curious. And I find it a little bit discouraging because I feel like people still aren't really interested in the language per se. They're interested in the idea that there may be something that another group of people has that are not white, that they don't have, and find that objectionable. And we'll say things like, you should give us your language for this or that or the other. And after all, we're honoring you by asking you for it. And it harkens me back to a plaque that was put at a burial site where a woman's bones were dug up and then reinterred on a beach here on the Cape. And it says, there's a memorial there that says, here lies the bones of a Wampanoag woman who gave of herself so that this nation could be great. So if we want to take something from you, you should feel honored that we want something that is yours in the first place, because that means it must be of worth. You should be honored by that. And I don't find it so honorable. And I don't think any Wampanoag woman gave of herself willingly so that this nation could be whatever. But it's nice to get recognition for your work. I mean, I just try to stay in the place where it's our language and we're all doing it. Like language is a social being. You couldn't reclaim a language on your own if your life depended on it. You have to have other people working really hard and speaking as well to have a conversation. So it's not just my work.
My last question, what's a message you would like our listeners to know? And can you speak it in the Wampanoag language?
Katabatol Tamawash, Wachi Miua Kwompai, Kawonk, Nakatsam As Natayanyan, You Nataki Manonakt, Kawonk Machimi Pish, Natayanyan, Natsnatam. I said, thank you for this opportunity and this time today. And the Wampanoag people are still here on our land. And I hope and pray that we will forever be here in this place on our land.
And that's our show for today. Thank you so much for listening to The Common. If you want to get in touch with us, hit us up on Instagram at WBUR The Common. You can also send us an email at thecommon@wbur.org. And now it's that time for me to let you know that The Common is produced by Franny Monahan. It's mixed by Emily Jankowski and Paul Vaitkus. And it's edited by Samatha Joshi and Ben Brock Johnson. And our theme music is Me, from Hisu. And from the newsroom of WBUR, I'm your host, Daryl C. Murphy. I'll talk to you next week.